Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 1001, Status Window, Records, Apparition, and Warning. Xietain had fallen unconscious after losing so much blood, which was completely natural, considering that there was at most 1 liter of blood running through his body, and considering the current condition of his body, it was already quite surprising that he had not died. This was all thanks to the fact that his evolution had been an evolution that raised even his deepest records, those of his race, to a whole new league. Even the most powerful soul evolver would die from the loss of about 4/5 of their total blood plus heavy wounds. Strangely, although Xietain could no longer sense the outside world, a sign that he was unconscious, he was somehow aware of his own existence. Perhaps he was not in a state of total unconsciousness, Xietain did not know. It was as if he was floating in a void of nothingness, in a big cloud surrounded by gray mist and a dark world in the surroundings. Regardless of everything and feeling that he was in no apparent danger, Xietain took the opportunity to check the records gained when he finally evolved to Second Order. First Order Superhuman Health Level 5, Second Order Superhuman Health Level 1, passively increases health by plus 580 points and increases the body's natural recovery rate by 30%. Healing type skills are 40% more effective on you. Third Order Golden Bones Level 1 has been raised to Level 5 in a natural way. Third Order Golden Bones, Third Order Passive Skill, Level 5, your skin becomes so tough that now no pre-evolution weapon outside of the Annihilation category can break through your defenses. Rank 0 weapons are unable to cut you, and Rank 1 weapons are 40% less effective against you, while the damage of Rank 2 weapons decreases by 20%. The hardness of your internal organs is multiplied by 2 times the previous level, and your bone skeleton is now equivalent to a gold skeleton, which multiplies your natural defense x 5 times. It automatically increases your endurance stat by plus 900 points permanently. First Order Enhanced Dexterity Level 5, Second Order Enhanced Dexterity Level 1, automatically increases the user's agility by plus 300 points and reduces the stamina consumption in combat by 8%. Unranked Danger Sense Level 5, First Order Predicted Danger Sense Level 5, the user will be able to passively foresee any kind of danger 1 second in advance. The skill has a great burden on the soul and mind despite not consuming mana or stamina, and the greater the danger the greater the burden on the user to the point of causing temporary loss of sight or hearing. You have learned a unique skill of the Blood Mystic class. You have learned Record Devastation. Record Devastation, Unique Skill, Level 5. Depending on the power of the user's bloodline, it is possible to degrade a soul evolver with lower blood running through their veins. Consumes 1500 mana points and 1500 stamina points to trigger the skill. First activation, Record Degradation only works on subjugated enemies. Reaches deep into the enemy's records and degrades them until they are sealed into a consumable item. The user can bestow the consumable item on an ally, raising that ally's power tremendously with a league below the original records. Most of the records obtained during the evolution process are absorbed and assimilated by your body and soul. You have received Strength, plus 4,977, Agility, plus 4,740, Health, plus 4,502, Stamina, plus 4,492, Mana, plus 3,820, Magic, plus 4,109. You cannot absorb any more records until you choose your advancement class and advance to Third Order. All records obtained during the evolution process will be saved for later absorption. Blood Mystic, Second Order Mystics are considered to be mysterious and almost unreachable existences, geniuses in the path of magic and unmatched when they set out to focus on a field. It is said that the path of a mystic must be walked by those who wish to achieve true perfection. Decreases mana consumption by 30% when using attack-type magic skills, and increases the critical hit rate by 20% when using magic against an enemy. Note, your synchronization with your Blood Mystic class has not reached the maximum point. Xietain paused while floating in that big space of nothingness, and after a moment's thought he called up his status window. Xietain. Status points, 220. Level, 100. Race, High Human. Bloodline, High Human. Class, Blood Berserker, First Order, Blood Mystic, Second Order. Subclass, King. Title, One Hit to Kill, Irregular, Brilliant Mind, Savior of the World, Destroyer of Destroyers, 1 vs Millions, King of China. Strength, 6,947, plus 255, agility, 7,030, plus 295, health, 6,769, plus 70, stamina, 7,752, plus 235, mana, 6,691, plus 65, magic, 7,002, plus 255, spiritual power, 1. Active skills. Blood manipulation, 4th order active skill, level 5. Blazing punishment of divine blood, 4th order active skill, level 1. Regeneration, 3rd order active skill, level 5. Shadow blink, 1st order active skill, level 5. Crimson lightning flash, 3rd order active skill, level 1. Invisibility, 1st order active skill, level 5. Gravity manipulation, 3rd order active skill, level 5. Void Fist, 3rd order active skill, level 5. All for One, 3rd order unique skill, level 5. War Cry, 2nd order active skill, level 5. Lonely Wolf Aura, 3rd order active skill, level 5. Rumbling the Heavens, Shaking the Earth, 3rd order active skill, level 4. Mankind's Pioneer, 3rd order active skill, level 3. Soul Manipulation, X-rank passive active skill, level 1. Record Devastation, unique skill, level 5. Passive skills. Super Warrior, 1st order passive skill, level 1. Immovable Heart, 4th order unique passive skill, level 5. Superhuman Health, 2nd order passive skill, level 1. Golden Bones, 3rd order passive skill, level 5. Mechanic, unranked passive skill, level 5. Cooking, 2nd order passive skill, level 2. Throwing, unranked passive skill, level 5. God of War's Will, 3rd order passive skill, level 5. Blacksmithing, 4th order passive skill, level 1. Predicted Danger Sense, 1st order passive skill, level 5. Enhanced Dexterity, 2nd order passive skill, level 1. Blood Berserker's Wrath, unique skill. Magic Break, 6th order passive skill, level 5. High Human, By Xietain sighed and subconsciously thought of the light novels he loved to read so much when he was younger and before the apocalypse broke out. Damn, this daddy will turn into an elf or something? Please don't do it. I'm already so handsome that if I become even more amazing, ladies won't stop harassing me. While expressing his thoughts out loud, Xietain looked at the benefits of his improved race. Hi human, you are slowly getting closer to becoming the perfect being of a race. Now you cannot be affected by any viruses and your need for sleep decreases drastically. All food you consume will give you the maximum possible benefit, discarding the unhealthy automatically. Increase your natural charm by 70% and increase the effect of your words when talking to other humans, which will make it easier for you to be obeyed. Your body's natural defense and the hardness of your internal organs is multiplied x3 compared to your previous self. Your blood has extremely powerful healing properties and is very attractive to other subjects. Oh, no. Xietain sighed and shook his head. Looks like this elder really is destined to be a lady killer after all. 70% increase in my natural charm, not bad at all. Worthy of someone like me. That's how it should be. Soul record, this daddy will spoil and be gentle with you even though you often bully me. Xietain was silent in what he thought was his inner self, and after several seconds he couldn't help but be surprised by her shamelessness. Thank heavens no one can hear me, or else I would really have to hide for a couple of thousand years in some remote cave without coming out to see the sunlight. Just as he finished rambling, two bright eyes as red as blood flashed in the middle of the darkness right in front of him, and Xietain subconsciously stepped back with his heart beating like crazy. Who are you? Xietain demanded instead of asking, while keeping his wits about him. Was this not his subconscious? Because Xietain was pretty sure it was. But, if that was the case, how on earth had anyone come in here? Many might think he was delirious, but Xietain trusted his instincts and knew that what he was seeing was not as simple as an illusion caused by his injuries, far from it. This was real, and it was happening right in front of him. Several seconds passed, and those seconds soon turned into minutes. However, Xietain got no response or any words in return. Finally, a surprisingly gentle and kind voice that caused his guard to inadvertently drop rang out amidst the dark world and gray mist. Great changes will soon come over your life and the lives of those close to you. You have grown and are now many times stronger than before, but do not let your new strength go to your head. The time of trial is closed, and the real battle is only about to begin. The eyes in the midst of the darkness slowly grew dimmer and dimmer as the voice grew weaker and weaker with each word it spoke. You already know what path to choose next. When you advance to the third order, you will need to seek me out to continue your path. As for who or what I am, you already know in your heart. At least in part, that is. Xietain stood stunned staring at the darkness in front of him fixedly, and for a long period of time did not move from that spot. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 1002 Blood Warlock. Xietain stood stunned staring at the darkness in front of him fixedly, and for a long period of time did not move from his place. After a long time, or at least according to Xietan's personal point of view, he slowly sat down in the middle of the mist and looked straight ahead with a confused but at the same time serious expression on his face. First of all, what Xietain needed to ask himself was the following. Who or what was it, or rather, what or who does that presence from before belong to? He muttered even though in his heart he already had a somewhat clear answer. If that presence and voice belonged to Sirius, the heavenly wolf, then it would all make sense from a certain perspective. It was no secret to Xietain that regardless of whether the connection between him and the heavenly wolf was big or small, the reality was that this connection was there, beating alive like a moving heart. However, if that presence from before really was Sirius, the heavenly wolf, then there was a new unknown that somehow made Xietain a little uneasy. Just before, when the heavenly wolf spoke, Xietain felt a lot of inner peace. This kind and degree of inner peace was something he had only felt very few times in his life, mostly during his youth while he was still living at his parents' house. This was a depth of peace that only someone extremely close to him could transmit. Sirius was a legendary existence, but Xietain knew practically nothing about him. All of his information came from what Lilith had told him about Sirius constellation and what she had heard from other older higher existences. It was said that the heavenly wolf Sirius was a being who had exceeded the limits of this universe and the soul record and therefore eventually traveled to a higher plane, as did the ice goddess Xietain. As to what that higher plane was, Xietain now knew it was the so-called golden domain, the true beginning of everything, the core of everything, the parent plane of all worlds that existed in the domain under the control of the soul record. Was the heavenly wolf alive or dead? No one knew for sure, probably. The only information about the heavenly wolf was probably within the constellation that was imprinted in the stars, a way to honor a being worthy of respect even from the soul record. Am I really the reincarnation of the heavenly wolf? Xietain let himself fall onto his back and stretched both arms outward as he gazed into the infinite darkness above him. Somehow, something felt out of place, but Xietain could not pinpoint what it was. Just as that presence said before it disappeared, Xietain was practically 100% sure it was Sirius. However, just as Sirius said before vanishing into the darkness, it was just an idea and nothing certain, as Xietain didn't know if Sirius was his past self or something different. But Xietain frowned. His voice sounded like a hollow echo in that unknown space filled with nothing. The words Sirius said and the words Sherlin entrusted Kong Jun to tell me. What is this all about? It was touching on this point where Xietan's confusion kept growing. He knew nothing of what the two mysterious existences wanted to point out with their words, and somehow this made Xietain angry with them, even though in his heart he knew that such a thing was not only immature, but would also get him nowhere. But couldn't you two just say in plain words what is about to happen? Xietain sighed. Besides, the heavenly wolf said that after the third order I will need to go to him in order to continue advancing. If I'm not wrong, what Sirius the heavenly wolf means is that in order to continue walking the path I walk and destroy the walls or barriers that appear at each key point, I will need to go to where his constellation is. Xietain slowly stood up, grateful to the fact that at least in this place his body was in one piece. Xietain had been stuck in the first order of the universal power scale for almost a full year. At that time, he had been furious and in some way felt that the requirements the soul record had demanded of him were too much for someone of level 50. But, as time passed, Xietain came to learn that those requirements were not necessitated by the soul record but were the materials, the very foundation that would build the continuation of the path he had begun to walk when he chose Blood Berserker as his first job. Of course, Xietain could have chosen a different class and evolved faster. He would have gained levels and stats faster, become more powerful quicker, and his level would not have stagnated for so long. However, would those classes have evolved his race to a higher one? would they have given him such powerful skills? The answer was no. The good was long overdue, and Blood Mystic was excellent. How long will it take me to complete the requirements of my next election? 1 year? 2 years? Maybe more. Xietain smirked. If this were a novel, there would surely be readers crying like little girls for not seeing a level-up message. Though I wonder if the author would care. There are all kinds of authors in this world. In between his ramblings in an attempt to calm his agitated heart, not only by finally being a little more aware of his new strength, but also by the fact that something unknown but big was coming his way, Xietain called out the continuation of his path. Let me see them. My paths to the Third Order. The soul record seemed to be waiting for these words as not even 2 seconds later, several messages flashed in Xietan's retinas. Your possible paths of evolution have been studied and confirmed. With the achievements and the records you have earned until now, a path you can take is now seen. Please select a job. A befitting trial will be given to you. Option 1, Warrior of the End of the World. Option 2, Chaotic Blood Mage. Option 3, Blacksmith of Fortune. The first 2 options somehow scare me a little bit. The corner of Xietan's mouth trembled slightly as he said these words, to no one in particular. Warrior of the End of the World. End of the world. Considering that Xietain indeed was capable of destroying a lower world if he gave his all and was willing to die for it, the name of the option 1 was very good. But I don't want to have anything to do with the end of the world. Xietain didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Chaotic Blood Mage didn't sound as bad as the first one, but it still sounded ominous. Chaotic? What was that supposed to mean? Xietain was looking for peace and calm, not chaos and disaster. Ironically enough, though, all the places he appeared in or visited ended up being chaotic in one way or another. For example, Eventide World was in relative peace for thousands of years, but in less than half a year there was a world war between human kingdoms, and after that a war broke out against the demon race. Of course, Xietain was not choosing the first 2 options not because of their names, but for 2 other reasons in particular. Both Warrior of the End of the World and Chaotic Blood Mage were very powerful classes. Xietain was 200% sure of that. He was sure that if he chose one of those 2 classes, when he reached the Third Order he would probably become invincible among all the lower existences in the universe regardless of the difference in level or talent. This was not arrogance but his belief after analyzing many things based on his experience. However, hadn't Lilith warned him enough about classes that are extremely powerful? Strong at first, but eventually fell a bit short compared to others. In most cases at least. Warrior of the End of the World was probably a class with monstrous physical attacks, and coupled with the power of overlap regeneration, its effectiveness would certainly be frightening. Just thinking about it or imagining it made Xietan's legs tremble. Chaotic Blood Mage, a class that would definitely increase Xietan's magical power and magic to new scales. In fact, it was very likely that blood manipulation would rise to 5th Order right away, and even features like bloodlines would be unlocked with this class. The word chaotic, in particular, was proof of its terror and dominance on the battlefield. But neither of those 2 paths is the path I want to walk. Xietain blinked and breathed out, because neither of those 2 paths is capable of leading me to where I want to go. As for option 3, Xietain never planned to become a blacksmith despite the fact that he somehow turned out to be quite talented in this field. Talent added to how hard-working Xietain was, the Blacksmith of Fortune class was a very good option, but he didn't consider it even for a moment. Just like you said, serious heavenly wolf, whoever you are. Xietain smiled mockingly and looked at option 4 with bright eyes. From the moment I chose Blood Mystic as my 2nd Order class, I already knew the continuation of the path I would walk in the future. And now it was time to see if he was wrong or not. Option 4, Blood Warlock. There was no surprise in Xietan's eyes as his gaze fell upon the 4th and last evolution path that the soul record had been able to study based on the records he had been accumulating all this time until now. From the moment Xietain saw his paths to the 2nd Order and chose Blood Mystic as his continuation, he immediately knew what the path he would choose to the 3rd Order would be. I wonder if there was ever anyone capable of finding the path they would walk faster than the soul record. Xietain scratched the bridge of his nose gently and muttered to himself. Blood Berserker for the 1st Order. Berserkers, extremely talented and terrifying existences in close combat. Blood Mystic for the 2nd Order. Mystics, existences that through the use of magic try to connect with their souls and thus achieve divinity. Blood Warlock for the Third Order. Warlocks, they were practically perfect entities. They mastered the arts of melee combat but were also extremely talented mages capable of combining both styles of combat. Xietain believed and was confident that Blood Warlock would lead him to where he wanted to go. Berserker for the body and mystic for the spirit. Xietain laid down on the black floor again, and as he stared into nothingness he thought aloud, just like a bulb and electric power, the two need to connect and match in order for the light to come on. I have soul manipulation, so now I am more certain than before about this fact. With both body and soul being perfectly linked together, all Xietain would eventually get would be the absolute perfection. Soul Record, Option 4, Blood Warlock. Xietan's voice echoed amidst the silence and fog that enveloped his figure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Several seconds passed during which the only sound was Xietan's breathing. He also did not receive messages as in the two previous cases when he chose Blood Berserker or Blood Mystic. But Xietain was not anxious and waited. Patience was a great virtue. Nah, he was not particularly patient at all. The reason Xietain waited was because, as stupid as the thought was, he seemed to feel how much effort the existence or thing called Soul Record was putting into this. Finally, the fun began approximately 30 seconds after Xietain expressed his intention and said in a clear voice his choice. You have chosen Blood Warlock as your breakthrough class to the Third Order. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 1003 Evolution Requirements and Weird Petition. You have chosen Blood Warlock as your breakthrough class to the Third Order. Warlocks, beings born with one of their parents being an exceptional warrior with incomparable talent and the other being a mage without paragon on the path of mysticism. By merging the two paths, there is some possibility for a warlock to arise in the universe. Warlocks possess the potential to become ruling figures of entire worlds, but few have managed to grow enough to reach a stage of power with which they can stand their ground against all winds and tides. Blood Warlock, a path that has only been opened for you who have walked a short but rougher and bloodier path than the longer paths that others have walked. Prove that you are worthy of mastering the power of the bloodlines, making yours and your allies what does not belong to them. Prove you're worthy to go against fate itself with each and every one of your actions, replacing talents at will and building monstrous legions with your own hands. Complete the following requirements to advance to the next order. Evolve your Void Fist skill to 4th Order, incomplete. Evolve your Shadow Blink skill to 3rd Order, incomplete. Take control over 5 of the 6 fragments of the Key of Destiny, January 5th. Absorb the fragments of the Key of Destiny, incomplete. Use the first activation of your Record Devastation skill, Record Degradation, and take over the deepest records of the following ancient existences. 9-Headed Immortal Dragon, incomplete. Saint of the Absolute, incomplete. Demon of the Corruption, incomplete. Mana Eater Tree, incomplete. Get control over the earth and make the other factions no choice but to retreat. If you join a faction or submit to any other leader, you will fail the trial and will not be able to advance to the Third Order. Cool. Xietain slapped his thigh with the palm of his hand and said matter-of-factly, at the very least I don't have a time limit at all, which is cool, no? Ha ha ha. Xietain laughed and laughed for what seemed like an eternity. His laughter echoed amidst the darkness, slowly becoming weaker as he stopped laughing like a lunatic as time passed. Huh. Xietain breathed all the air out of his lungs heavily and fell silent for several seconds before taking a breath and sighing again. Evolving those 2 skills in itself are already 2 difficult requirements to achieve, but they are actually the easiest of all the ones I need to complete. Xietain closed his eyes and muttered to himself, fragments of the Key of Destiny? Where the hell am I supposed to find them? No, for starters, what the hell is this Key of Destiny? And how the hell do I have one of the 6 that exist? This daddy can't remember ever getting anything this good in his whole life. Putting aside the fact that apparently Xietain already had one of the 5 fragments he needed to get, even though he had no idea when did he obtain it or what it was, he had no idea where those fragments were. He didn't even have a clue what the Key of Destiny was. How was he supposed to seek something he didn't know what it was? Still, Xietain wasn't stupid and the Soul Record certainly wouldn't put impossible requirements before him to complete. At the very least, there had to be a 0.00000000001% chance of success, or else the fairness that the soul record was known for would disappear. 4 fragments. Xietain looked at the 5th requirement he needed to complete and his eyes glittered peculiarly. 9-headed immortal dragon, saint of the absolute, demon of the corruption, mana-eater tree. I have no idea who those are, but they're probably from Tao Zhi's time or even older according to what this soul record message says. Coincidence or not, Xietain needed 4 fragments and there were 4 beings he needed to defeat to subsequently snatch their records. The problem is once again I don't know where those 4 old farts are. To begin with, how the hell are those old things still apparently alive after their mothers know how many years? Xietain sat down as he cursed under his breath. Tao Zhi survived for some coffin whatever, but now it seemed that there were 4 beings, just as old or even older than him. Besides, unlike Tao Zhi, who was an alligator, these 4 new enemies definitely made Xietain feel bad vibes just from their names. As for the last requirement and the warning at the end, Xietain didn't know what to think about it. Conquering Earth was something that in some sense, Xietain had already seen coming and in fact was one of his goals, so it wasn't particularly surprising. The problem here was that he needed to conquer Earth to kick the other factions out of this world. Soul record, could you tell your daddy who these other factions you're telling me about are? Xietain grumbled. Of course, there was no response. It wasn't like he was expecting for one anyway. Xietain was happy that the soul record didn't seem to be a sentient being, or it would have definitely killed him with a lightning strike for referring to himself as your daddy. Be that as it may, Xietain was at a complete loss. I have no idea about which direction to go. Xietain couldn't help but laugh as he thought of a gif he saw when he was younger in which a yellow dog sat around a table drinking a cup of coffee with everything around it on fire. It's fine. He stood up still smiling cheerfully. What I have to do hasn't changed. Right. What Xietain needed and had to do had never changed. From day one, he had only one option, so it wasn't really an option, but an obligation, a necessity. He just had to look straight ahead and keep moving forward, only then would he get anywhere. Standing still was not an option unless his wish was to die. Xietain opened his eyes after an unknown amount of time and immediately grimaced in pain. He didn't even have to look down and look at his body, he could feel everything after all. The grimace of pain on his face turned into a grimace of helplessness and bitterness as he realized that his arm still needed to regenerate. The regeneration process of his arm had not even begun, as after healing his major wounds, his system began to focus on regrowing his left leg. The thing was that regardless of how much time had passed, Xietain couldn't help but notice that his leg from the thigh down had only just caught up to the formation of the knee. Holy fuck, that damn son of a bitch, Tao Zhi. I should have made him suffer a little longer before turning him into a proper alligator. Xietain wailed with a dark expression on his face. You're awake, little king. Hearing a beautiful voice beside him, Xietain looked to his right and his black eyes met a beautiful pair of deep blue eyes. Who else besides Shangguan Bingshue's mother used to refer to Xietain using the title Little King? Shangguan Xinyue pursed her lips into a daydreamy smile and sighed as if she was remembering something. You were awesome last night. Looks like you brought your wild fighting style to bed while wielding a different greatsword. Xietain almost fell to the ground and only now realized that he was lying on a comfortable, expensive-looking bed that, although not as good as his treasure bed, was still comfortable and large. With a pale face, he subconsciously lifted the sheet that covered him softly. Seeing that he was still wearing the same shorts from before and not noticing anything unusual, Xietain let his head fall back on the pillow and exhaled in relief. That's rude, you know? Shangguan Xinyue was not happy at the young man's reaction in front of her. You had this beautiful little sister next to you, but instead of getting happy at the possibility of losing your virginity, what you feel is scared? Are you sure you only lost your left leg in the battle before? No, for starters, did you ever have one, to begin with? Xietain looked at Shangguan Bingshue's mother, feeling a little speechless. Until not too long ago, Xietain and Shangguan Xinyue were not particularly close as they had never really exchanged many words. However, the two had naturally grown closer after fighting to the death against Tao Zhi not once but twice. Even so, Xietain did not believe that Shangguan Xinyue would joke with him in such a blatant and direct manner as this. Were it not for the fact that I do now know that beneath the ice layer covering Bing Shui actually lurks a teasing little seductress, I would rather be beaten to death before associating the two women with each other as mother and daughter. Bai Zemin did not know whether to laugh or cry. But, since Shangguan Xingyue was poking at him, then Bai Zemin wasn't going to be polite. Little sister? Bai Zemin smiled slightly and said, feigning confusion, Auntie, where is the little sister you were talking about? In this room it's just you and me. I am 21, as for you. Bai Zemin had not finished his words, but Shangguan Xingyue's expression was no longer all smiles as before. Little king, at this rate your reign might not last long, you know? Shangguan Xingyue glared at him. Humph. Bai Zemin snorted. After a minute or two of silence, he inquired in a low voice, how long has it been? 15 days. Shangguan Xingyue calmly responded. After a short pause, she slowly explained the situation of each member that took part in the battle against Tao Ji. Evangeline has recovered to 50% thanks to Xietain and multiple potions. Bing Shui will still probably need another 30 days to return to her peak since the bones in her arms literally turned to dust. Kong Jun is resting on that treasure bed of yours in a different room, and although his life is not in danger, he will probably need 3 to 4 months in this pocket world before he recovers 100%. After a few seconds of silence, Bai Zemin nodded. I see. 15 days in the collector's pocket world was equivalent to 1.5 days in the real world, so it really wasn't much from the point of view of all living beings who were living their lives normally in the outside world. Evangeline would be 100% recovered in another fortnight or so, and by then only 3 days would have passed in the outside world. Although Shangguan Bing Shui's overall injuries were not life-threatening, the bone pulverization on both arms was not something that could be healed overnight. Considering that a normal fracture could take a minimum of 2 to 6 months for a normal human, pulverizing the bones was probably irreparable in a lifetime. Of course, Shangguan Bing Shui was far from being a normal human, and so she could probably recover within several more days after Evangeline's full recovery. As for Kong Jun, Bing Shui and Yijun told me that it was thanks to your blood that Kong Jun is alive now. Although the time he needs to fight at full strength again is high, your blood kept him from the clutches of death. Shangguan Xingyue gazed at Bai Zemin, curiously. Yes, well. It's really a great fortune for everyone that my race evolved, improving my physique and blood to new heights. Bai Zemin sighed. I feel like an elixir walking. Shangguan Xingyue's eyes shone, and after a few seconds of silence, she whispered, Little king. Could you give me some of your blood? Bai Zemin began to cough furiously when he heard the words of the woman lying next to him. His surprise was so big that he didn't even feel pain, despite the sudden movements that coughing repeatedly brought with it. Seeing him like this, Shangguan Xingyue rolled her eyes before licking her lips and saying softly, although that little wooden pagoda of yours gave me back my humanity, I occasionally feel a certain desire to drink blood. It's not that I can't restrain it, it's really no big deal and doesn't affect me. But... Bai Zemin looked at Shangguan Bingshuan's mother in shock as she grinned like a hungry little cat. I didn't lie when I said your blood was yummy back then. I'm sure it's much tasty now. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 1004 Love vs. Pride. Humph, Bing Shui, you should stay away from that little king. Shangguan Xingyue pouted and folded her arms like a little girl angry at her parents for not buying her favorite candy. Shangguan Bing Shui looked at her mother feeling a bit speechless and with an expression that exposed her bewilderment asked dumbfounded, did something happen? Crocodile tears appeared in Shangguan Xingyue's eyes as she wailed disconsolately, Bing Shui, you have to believe me. That little king actually tried to seduce me, and when I refused, he said that, Stop. Shangguan Bing Shui looked at her mother with a serious expression and reprimanded, Shangguan Xingyue, you'd better tell the truth if you don't want me to get angry at you. But. Shangguan Xingyue looked on the verge of tears. She stomped her feet loudly and looked at Bai Zemin in the distance with flames burning in her eyes. I only asked for a bit of his blood, so why does he have to be so mean? Pooh, you did what? Shangguan Bing Shui almost fell to the ground. And that way, for the next 10 minutes, Shangguan Bing Shui gazed at her mother with serious eyes and taught her manners with a firm hand. In the distance, Bai Zemin could feel the corner of his mouth trembling slightly every 2 or 3 seconds as he watched and listened to the mother-daughter duo engaging in a heated, not very elegant conversation. Ha, ha ha, just like Bai Zemin, Wu Yijun could feel the corner of her mouth trembling as she tried to chuckle. Auntie has always been this playful, much to Bing Shue's dismay. I can imagine. Bai Zemin could barely hold back the urge to laugh out loud as he imagined certain scenarios of a daughter repeatedly reprimanding her mother for not acting appropriately. When Bing Shui began to grow old enough to realize the effect her beauty had on men, her personality began to become more and more withdrawn to the point where, well, she ended up looking down on all men alike. Wu Yijun sighed. That's no wonder. Bai Zemin nodded calmly and pointed out, lustful stares, offensive words, abandoned by her father as if she was a piece of trash. It is just natural for Bing Shui to protect herself and her mind through building a wall of ice and disdain against all men around her. Wu Yijun nodded, and Xingyue tried her best to bring Bing Shui out of her shell, even taking on a very funny and playful personality like the one you are seeing now. Aunt Xingyue tried to be more than a mother, but also went out of her way to be Bing Shue's friend in an attempt to help her daughter move on while blaming herself for her insistence on a one-sided love. Bai Zemin was silent and did not comment on the matter. It was true that some of Shangguan Xingyue's choices might have been harmful to Shangguan Bing Shui, but Bai Zemin was certain that she had given 200% of her best to raise her daughter. Wasn't it proof of this the fact that Shangguan Bing Shui was the second most perfect woman Bai Zemin had ever met in his entire life? Besides, Shangguan Xingyue was in love with Shanyuan Wendian back then, and people in love often could not see the world before them with complete clarity. Bai Zemin had been blinded by a false love after all. He was clear how powerful this emotion was. Unfortunately, Auntie could not turn Bing Shui into what our past society considered a normal girl. No one could. Wu Yijun gave Bai Zemin a sidelong glance and said slowly, that was until your appearance. Bai Zemin did not feign ignorance as he was clear on how things were. At that time back at the university, all I was thinking about was surviving and meeting my family using whatever methods necessary. Killing, threatening, using the lives of my teammates? None of that really mattered to me. He said looking at the mother-daughter duo, calmly. My then self viewed Bing Shui as an arrogant little bitch. I thought I could never feel positive emotions towards someone like her, and the only reason I was still with you all was because I needed everyone's help, especially Bing Shui's on account of her power. Hee hee. Arrogant little bitch? Well, Bing Shui definitely hated you to the core, so it's okay. Wu Yijun covered her mouth and giggled, not quite slyly. After a few seconds, she returned to her previous posture and with a faint smile said softly, but just as your negative thoughts and feelings towards Bing Shui have disappeared and are now positive, the thoughts and feelings Bing Shui had towards you have changed as well. Seeing that Bai Zemin said nothing, Wu Yijun turned to look at him and said softly, I will not say anything because I know what your thoughts are on the matter. You are a man who stands out not only for his strength, but also for his intelligence. I have confidence that you know what I mean. Bai Zemin smiled somewhat bitterly and nodded without saying a word. Wu Yijun looked at the mother-daughter duo again and continued, I don't understand very much about why you are so against having multiple partners, but I respect and in some respects admire this part of you. I don't know if what Bing Shui feels for you is love, probably even she herself doesn't know for sure. But, if at some point in our journey you change your mind, and if Bing Shui happens to fall in love with you, I hope you'll accept her when the time comes. After a short pause, Bai Zemin asked without looking at her, you won't speak for you? Me? Wu Yijun shook her head gently and said with a faint smile, there is no need, you already know how I feel and what I think. Just like a man who is too pushy is not attractive, the same applies to us women, hee hee. I'll wait for you to accept me or for my feelings for you to fade away, and maybe I'll fall in love with someone else, although I doubt that such a thing will happen. You never know since we can live for at least several thousand years if we don't fall in the middle of the road. And if neither of those two things happen? Bai Zemin couldn't help but ask. If you stand firm or don't love me at any point in the future to come and if my feelings for you prevail against the test of time, then I will simply give my all to help you without troubling you. Wu Yijun said with no burden in her voice, just like I did for the past year, and just like I will do tomorrow. The two stayed silent for a minute or two until Bai Zemin opened his mouth and said slowly, Yijun, if at some point in the future to come it turns out that I do accept having multiple partners and this does not discomfort my current partner, then you will certainly be by my side, if you still love me, that is. Wu Yijun turned her face to look at him with a surprised expression. Her beautiful eyes as black as night shone like stars in the sky and her small mouth opened and closed as if she wanted to say something but not daring to say it just in case. In the past, Xietan's response was always firm and negative to the approach of having more than one partner. Regardless of who suggested it and regardless of whether it was a joke or not, Xietain repeatedly made it clear that his heart would not accept anyone other than the one it had already accepted. Today, however, Xietain did not refuse 100% and for the first time left a small door open. To call it a door could be exaggerated, it was probably more correct to call it a small hole the size of a grain of sand. But this was more than enough for Wu Yijun, who, although never admitted it out loud, knew that her heart was desperate and aching. However, I'm afraid matters are different with her. Xietain continued as he looked at Shangguan Bingshui in the distance, still scolding her mother. Shangguan Xingyue had been reduced to a little kid, with both hands in front and her head down as she nodded occasionally. You mean, Wu Yijun also looked at her good sister in the distance, with a certain amount of concern. Xietain looked at Shangguan Bingshui and said slowly, let's talk in the hypothetical case that I agree to have more than one life partner. I don't know how she feels about me for sure right now, but I do know with total certainty that even if Bingshui were to fall in love with me at some point in time to come, she and I will never be able to be together. Shangguan Bingshui was extremely proud, her pride might even be higher than that of Xietain or anyone else he had ever met in his life. To many, this pride of hers was stupid or a bad trait, but the reality was that she, Shangguan Bingshui, absolutely and totally had the qualifications to be proud and arrogant. Beautiful like an immortal fairy out of a fantasy fairy tale, powerful like a goddess capable of reigning over millions and crushing countless on the battlefield, Shangguan Bingshui had and far surpassed the two main requirements one needed in this world to be able to stand proud and act arrogant. She did not need to say a word, a wave of her hand was enough for millions of men and among them outstanding soul evolvers to line up to get her favor. Such a woman would hardly be willing to become just another number or one of a group of women competing for a man's favor. Why would she do it? Even if she were willing to be just another number in her beloved's group, her pride would certainly not allow it. Humans were proud creatures by nature, what more Shangguan Bingshui, who was practically perfection among humans. Being Shangguan Bingshui's best friend and practically sister, despite not sharing even 1% DNA, Wu Yijun naturally understood what Xietain meant without the need for him to put it into words. In the hypothetical case that you accept more than one partner and your heart accepts us, it will be up to Bingshui whether she decides to be your life partner or not. Wu Yijun said in a firm voice, I, Wu Yijun, am an arrogant and proud woman, I do admit it. I always was and always will be. But, if I can have a life of thousands of years and even eternal happiness together with the man I love, then what good is my pride if it will only bring me pain? If Bingshui's pride turns out to be the victor at the end of the race, then the love she feels is not and never was anything big. Xietain said nothing and simply remained silent after making it clear that although his stance was still the same, at least he no longer repudiated the thought, no longer after realizing that by his side were two women who were giving their all to support him. At the end of the road, however, the final decision lay not with Xietain but with Lilith. If she did not accept it or felt uncomfortable, then he would be hers, and only hers eternally. Because Xietain would never accept Lilith having someone else other than him even if she could bring him all the happiness in the world, both sentimentally and physically. One of Xietan's mottos was, do not do what you would not like to be done to you, and therefore he was not only thinking of his own happiness and wants, but also of the happiness and wants of the woman he loved. As for the person in question, Lilith, she was fighting her last battle against the second-to-last invasion of the Golden Domain before the end that would mark a new beginning. Really thank you very much to all those who send gifts to the novel and support with valuable golden tickets. I hope we can all keep it up, love. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 1005, The Queen of the Battlefield. About 2 days had passed since that fatal moment when Lilith was a split second away from losing her life. Fortunately for her, the rank 6 earring that Xietain had forged after working practically non-stop for over half a year and in which Callie drew incredibly powerful runes ended up being vital for her to escape the clutches of death. Of course, with her heart pierced, she couldn't help but pull out another of the trump cards she kept hidden for her own personal reasons. Back then, Fire Sorrow had advised Lilith to retreat back to the faction castle and rest. Although the loss of a soul evolver capable of becoming the queen of the battlefield and terrifying all enemies would certainly be a great loss to the demonic army, Neither Fire Sorrow nor anyone else wanted to compromise a 6th-order talent capable of facing a 7th-order general on equal terms. However, Lilith did not listen to Fire Sorrow's words. After resting for about 6 or 7 hours and healing enough for her life to no longer be in danger, Lilith unleashed all the fear she had felt before and turned it into anger that was hardly seen in her. From that moment on, hell descended on the invaders' heads, and the defenders finally remembered once again the reason why Lilith was broadly known as Bloody Succubus. The only not-so-small difference was the fact that this time Lilith lived up to the word bloody in her title. She contained the area of effect of her freezing mist to only 500 meters around her, instead of letting the mist spread over the entire battlefield. As a result of this decision, her allies were no longer receiving as much benefit as before and had to genuinely fight with their lives on the line with every passing second. Strangely, however, Lilith's mana consumption, which would naturally have to be lower as the skill's area of effect decreased, not only did not become lower but over time seemed to increase. As for the reason, the first to discover it was Han Jian, the general invader user of a frost whip who had been facing Crow together with Dia. Han Jian was already injured after facing Crow for so long, and the only reason he was still alive was thanks to the fact that he had received timely support. Therefore, Han Jian definitely did not see the moment coming when all of his movements became sickeningly stiff to the point where it took him almost 1 second to regain his freedom. Less than a second sounded like a small thing, but for beings capable of cutting through space and moving great distances in the blink of an eye, that small span of time could be fatal or vital, depending on the circumstances. Ugh. Han Jian felt a sharp stab of pain in his chest, and his eyes nearly popped out of his head when he saw a sword as white as milk piercing his chest from behind. Bitch. Realizing what was happening, Han Jian became furious and unleashed all his energy in the hope of forcing the woman who was as beautiful as a goddess, but as annoying as the plague to back down. However, to the utter shock of Han Jian, Dia, and Crow, Lilith did not back away and took the sonic blast head-on. Her bewitching body shook slightly, giving her an extremely fragile appearance as proof that she had not yet fully recovered. But Lilith not only ignored the pain but also didn't seem to notice or simply didn't care about the trail of blood trickling down the corner of her lips. Total blizzard. The sweet voice of Lilith that Bai Zemin was used to hearing every day was nowhere to be found, and from Han Jian's point of view, it was no different than the voice of a true demon. Han Jian didn't have time to cry out in pain, rather, he couldn't do it. From his chest down, up, and to both sides, Han Jian felt his internal organs and blood starting to freeze at dizzying speeds, and at this rate it wouldn't be long before if life would be lost forever. Fuck. Dia tightened his grip on his sword and without hesitation lunged towards Lilith. In his heart, Dia knew that he needed Han Jian's help, or else the next to fall would be none other than him. Stray dog, where the fuck do you think you're going? Hearing the furious roar similar to that of a rabid lion thundering behind him, Dia had no choice but to turn around and hurriedly raised his sword on a diagonal to parry the attack of an enraged Crow who was glaring at him with bloodshot eyes. You had fun attacking with your little girlfriend, didn't you? Now it's my turn. Crow's body was riddled with wounds, and red-colored blood with golden hints had stained his 3 pairs of wings. His force had dropped tremendously, but even then Dia wasn't able to shake him. Shit. How are these old bastards so strong? The elders said that they were only 1 stage above us in terms of power, but what's with this stupid ability to fight for days on end? Dia brandished his sword in desperation, knowing what awaited him if he didn't do something soon, but unfortunately for him all his attacks only managed to match Crow, and he could never break his blockade to charge towards the black-haired and ruby-eyed female. After a minute or two, Dia turned around when he heard Han Jian's piercing and desperate cry, and his eyes widened when he saw his now former battle partner being cut in 2 halves from the waist. Small crystals of frozen blood flew everywhere and floated into outer space as Han Jian howled in pain for the next good 30 seconds, which was not unlike the last level of hell for him. You have received? You get magic plus 315, strength plus 314, agility plus 283, stamina plus 125. You have leveled up and reached level 684. You have received 64 status points to distribute freely. After weeks of killing enemies, she had risen to level 684 from her previous 677. Quite impressive, considering a higher existence could spend years at the same level. Lilith looked coldly at Dia, and he felt chills as his eyes met hers. Add 500 points to health. Lilith decided somewhat cautiously after realizing that she needed to get better fast. Once the status points to distribute it were added to her health stat, Lilith didn't stop to feel the improvement, and with a fierce flapping of the two pairs of wings behind her back she charged towards Dia, who kept cursing Crow. Dia was in better physical condition than Han Jian, as he never had to face Crow by himself and had appeared 1 or 2 weeks after the battle started. However, even he was unable to do anything against the duo of the demonic army joining hands. Lilith's Ice Frost type skills naturally did not go well with Crow's Fire Heat type skills. However, the two carried out their tasks perfectly, and after fighting for about 4 hours, Dia finally succumbed under a whirlwind of purple flames that he had fallen prey to after his movements were stopped by small, but incredibly terrifying ice particles floating around him. Once the whirlwind of purple flames over 5,000 meters high disappeared and stopped glowing in the dark outer space, Dia's charred and incomplete body appeared before Crow and Lilith's eyes. Pooh! Crow spat in the direction of the corpse and said angrily, "You arrogant little piece of shit, it turned out you were no big deal in the end, or were you?" Crow turned to look at Lilith, but was a bit surprised when he met the coldest look he had ever seen on her. "Crow, you help Valiant. I'll go assist Hellscar." Her words sounded more like a command than a suggestion, and strangely Crow found himself nodding subconsciously. It perplexed him. Crow, like most higher existences, had been a leader of his own army at some point in history before joining the demonic army. However, this had been many, many years ago, and the bearing of a true leader had long since left him. On the other hand, Lilith seemed to be very used to giving orders and leading, almost as if what she told in the past about always fighting alone and never having an army under her control was a lie. It was then that Crow realized that neither he nor anyone else knew much about Lilith. Unfortunately, he didn't have time to think under the circumstances, and before he had a chance to say a single word he saw how Lilith flapped her wings and turned into a flash of light, leaving a trail of frost in the direction of the distant battlefield where Hellscar was facing 2 enemy generals. Approximately 10 hours later, Lim Qingyu and Duan Dilan, who were fighting 2 versus 1 against Hellscar, succumbed after Lilith joined the battle. Lim Qingyu exploded into a pile of pieces of flesh and blood after receiving a vicious blow from the 2-handed sword wielded by Hellscar, while Duan Dilan was decapitated and his blood turned into small pieces of frozen ruby-colored crystal. The invaders of the Golden Domain naturally began to despair from the first moment Han Jian lost his life, and Dia followed soon after. Many tried to help, but it was then that Lilith's charm reminded them that approaching her without being strong enough was no different from committing suicide. Therefore, with over 50,000 invaders under her control, Lilith ordered them to start killing their former comrades, as her presence completely turned the tide of the war. Fire Sorrow was providing supporting fire to Lucia in the distance. Both women were doing their best to restrain a being with the strength of a faction leader, and the fact that they were able to hold back Xietain for so long left in proof that it wasn't for nothing that they were Lucifer's left hand and right hand. Impressive. Despite being at a disadvantage, Fire Sorrow couldn't help but divert her attention for a brief moment, and seeing how things were heading towards a pleasant ending for them, she sighed. This was the first time Fire Sorrow, and probably any other member of the demonic army, had seen Lilith let loose completely. The image of her causing terror among the enemies and wielding her sword like a goddess would certainly leave a deep mark on everyone's hearts. With Lilith and Hellscar joining Valiant and Crow, the 2 remaining enemy generals would probably not take long to fall. Fire Sorrow and Lucia only had to hold against Xietain until then, and with the union of all of them their chances of killing him would certainly not be small. However, none of this mattered that much compared to the main battlefield itself. Fire Sorrow averted her eyes slightly and looked towards the distant large sphere of darkness that seemed like a world on its own in the middle of nowhere. There, inside that world of darkness, Lucifer and the wrinkled old man who almost killed Lilith had been fighting for the past several hours. From the outside, no noises could be heard and there were no disturbances in the great black sphere, so it was difficult to know exactly what the situation was like inside. However, Fire Sorrow simply could not imagine Lucifer losing. She had only seen him lose to a single being, and that being was no longer around. An hour later, just as Fire Sorrow had predicted, the 2 remaining enemy generals finally fell under the union of 4 of the most powerful members of the demon army. Lucia and Xietain collided for the last time in a thunderous explosion that for an instant illuminated part of the universe as if a star were releasing great amounts of energy. As Lucia flew backwards, and with great difficulty stabilized herself after several hundred meters, she licked the trail of blood at the corner of her mouth with a cold expression while her white eyes with golden pupils stared at her enemy with a serious expression on her beautiful face. Xietain observed the trembling of his right hand with which he wielded his sword and said with a chuckle, "As expected of you, spear goddess Lucia. Your physical attacks are truly a monstrosity. Unfortunately, I can't win alone." Lucia shrugged her shoulders. Well. Xietain looked at Fire Sorrow and then looked at his left arm. The left sleeve of his robe had disappeared, and Xiein's red blood trickled down his arm until it dripped down his hand and subsequently floated into nothingness. "But you are not alone." It was then that Xiein's expression changed as he sensed several auras rapidly approaching, and when he saw Lilith and the others staring at him with murderous intent he couldn't help but be taken aback. He had been so focused on killing Lucia that he had not paid attention to his surroundings, but when Xietain looked at the battlefield his pupils shrank fiercely. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 1006 An unknown name and a negative feedback. Xietain sensed the murderous intent of the 6 members of the demonic army, but at this moment he was not paying attention to them not because he disdained them, but because it was simply difficult for him to accept the situation in front of him. How can this be possible? He muttered to himself while wide-eyed looking at the most terrifying scene he could have imagined. Xietain had been fighting against Lucia for days, but although the spear goddess was certainly powerful to the point of being able to hold him back, it still wasn't enough for Xietain to have to give his 100%. Therefore, he could afford the privilege of diverting his attention to other areas of the battlefield in general and thus get a clearer picture of how the war was developing over time. This naturally changed after Fire Sorrow decided to step in to support Lucia. The magical power of Fire Sorrow was simply monstrous, and even Xietain did not dare to act too arrogant under the assault of the 2 women. Therefore, he had to forget about the rest of the war and focus on his own battle, not only to kill 2 powerful enemy generals as soon as possible, but also to avoid losing his head in the process. Facing Lucia or Fire Sorrow in a one-on-one was one thing, and facing both at the same time was a completely different matter. But when Xietain saw the scene before him it was hard for him to accept the reality. It had only been a few hours, maybe 40 at most, since he had stopped paying attention to his surroundings. However, in such a short time, the changes that had occurred were simply monumental. Broken limbs, shredded pieces of cloth, along with metal fragments of what were once complete weapons and armor. Even more terrifying than the incomplete corpses, however, was the massive river of crimson blood that floated in the emptiness like a legendary monster. Yes, there were corpses of members of the demonic army. However, the number of losses of the demonic army was nothing compared to the losses of the Golden Domain. But soon, Xietain understood what was going on. "I see," Xietain said as he looked at Lilith and the others. "You 4 killed the 6 sons of heaven and then took care of the younger ones." Xietain admitted in his heart that these enemies were powerful, so powerful that they could even hold their own against 2 sons of heaven at the same time, even though the power energy they used was inferior to theirs. Therefore, imagining the scene of 2 enemies of 7th order or similar strength joining together was no longer difficult to comprehend what had happened. Sons of Heaven, a title that geniuses among geniuses like Lin Qinyu and the rest held over their heads from the moment they were born. Xiein's expression was not very friendly. This was because warriors comparable to 5th order soul evolvers were replaceable, but warriors comparable to 6th order soul evolvers were geniuses, and the loss of a single one was quite painful. As for the loss of a single son of heaven, probably an entire sect would be shocked if such a thing happened. But now that 6 sons of heaven had fallen in this invasion, Xieinli could only imagine how fierce the earthquake that would fall on the Golden Domain was going to be. Xieinli looked at the red-colored crack in the distance at the same time as Fire Sorrow's voice sounded in front of him. "It looks like the crack is closing. No more reinforcements for you." The thought of going back the way he came flashed in Xieinli's brain, but in less than a second he simply dismissed the idea even faster than the speed at which it popped up. Xieinli looked at Fire Sorrow and said indifferently, "The war of the little ones is over, but the war of the big ones is still ongoing." That was correct. Although the Golden Domain had lost the large-scale battle, the final outcome of the war had yet to be decided. Fire Sorrow and the rest looked toward the large black sphere in the distance. Almost 2 days had passed, but there was still no sound or change to give any clues about the situation inside. Even though I and that old man you saw before are both in the same realm of power, I am at stage 2, but he is at stage 7. Xietain scoffed. In other words, I am at the early stage of foundation forging realm, while the person your leader is facing is at the late stage. The difference in power is more than a little. Soon enough, the battle between Xietain against the 6 strongest generals of the demonic army broke out. For 17 continuous hours, the higher existences of the demonic army who had successfully survived the war against the Golden Domain until today watched from afar how space constantly shuddered and vibrated under the burst of power from the diverse physical and magical attacks flying everywhere. None of them intervened. Partly because they did not want to, and partly because they could not. Xietain was indeed powerful, very powerful, powerful enough to compare to a faction leader of higher existences. However, despite the fact that 5 of the 6 generals of the demonic army were wounded and tired, the 6 of them together formed a practically perfect team. With Lucia, Valiant, and Hellscar in the vanguard, Xietain could not make use of his higher speed and thus was unsuccessful every time he tried to reach the weaker mages in the rear. Relying on the triple alignment, Crow, Lilith, and Fire Sorrow were able to unleash their most powerful attacks, which forced Xietain to focus completely, as a single mistake would mean his death. After 17 hours of continuous battle, both sides broke apart and stared into each other's eyes. Crap, I have almost nothing left of mana. Crow whispered under his breath. He had become a bloodstain, as there were practically no healthy places on his body. The rest of them didn't say anything, but they weren't much better either. One of Valiant's swords had been destroyed when its duration hit 0, and her full plate armor was filled with cracks through which red blood with a small golden tinge was seeping out. Lilith's face was pale as a sheet, and even her beautiful usually red lips had lost their color. The expression on her face was a mixture of indifference and occasional pain, and although her life was no longer in real danger, there was still blood oozing occasionally from the wound on her chest. Hellscar had lost his armor and had 2 X-shaped gashes across his upper body. His internal organs were in plain display, and were it not for the fact that he was using one hand to hold them in place, he might have lost them along the way. Even Lucia had suffered. Her right arm guard had been broken to shreds, revealing her entire trembling, bloodied arm. In addition, her grip on her pitch-black spear was no longer as firm as before, and the sparkle in her eyes was a bit dull. Of course, Xietain was not unharmed at all. Despite the fact that there was no air in outer space, Xietain was panting as a natural response to the sudden drop in physical resistance. His eyes were wide open, his left arm was gone, and it was only with great difficulty that he was able to hold his now cracked sword. He did not underestimate his enemies, and actually praised them. You are really strong. To think that you would be able to fight me in this kind of circumstance. However, Xiaolin's eyes focused on the only existence in the entire battlefield that to this day had yet to suffer even a scratch. As expected of you, Calamity Witch. Xiaolin smiled with a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Even after all this, you're still in perfect condition. You flatter me. Fire Sorrow still had the same gentle smile that was so characteristic of her on her face. It's only thanks to the fact that I have excellent teammates. Heh. Let's leave it at that then. Xiaolin sneered. Fire Sorrow's magic robe was neat, her hair well combed, her face had a slight natural rosy color as proof that she still had plenty of mana to spend, and her breathing was steady and continuous. She took a step forward, much to the surprise of everyone except Valiant and Lucia. You Fire Sorrow, are you crazy? Come back. Crow barked from behind with wide eyes. They had all seen and tasted firsthand how terrifying the enemy in front of them was. Although Fire Sorrow was an extremely powerful mage, she was exactly that, a mage. Closing the distance with Xiaolin, who was a melee warrior, was basically asking to be killed. However, Fire Sorrow ignored Crow and pretended not to see the wariness in her enemy's eyes. Before we put an end to our own battle, I'd like to make a proposal to you, in which we both stand to gain something. How about it? She said with no change in her expression. Oh? Xiaolin looked at her noncommittally. How about if we each answer a question from the other? Fire Sorrow said, surprising not only Xiaolin but also her allies. That way, whoever comes out of here alive will be able to bring more than just victory home, but also information that could be helpful for the future. Of course, if you're not confident about coming out on top, then pretend I didn't say anything. Xiaolin did not respond right away, but after some thought, he could find no reason why he should refuse such an opportunity, and therefore he nodded. Very well, but I will ask first and you will answer. If you don't agree, then forget it. Go ahead. Ask anything you want and I'll answer with honesty. Fire Sorrow nodded indifferently. Xietain narrowed his eyes and slowly asked in a low voice, by any random chance. The name Li Xietain, ring any bells? Li Xietain? Fire Sorrow frowned and a flash of confusion shone in her purple pupils. Among the 8 major factions, there should be at least a couple of existences with that name, but as one of the most powerful beings in the universe I can guarantee you that none of those beings should be whomever you're looking for. Basically, while there might be some beings named Li Xietain among the factions of higher existences, none of them were even a 7th order soul evolver, therefore someone at Xietan's level should be indifferent to such existences. Even then, Fire Sorrow remembered that name and filed it deep in her memory. She didn't believe that someone who the Golden Domain seemed to be looking for was insignificant. It might even be the reason why they were invading so persistently. I see. Xietain nodded with a frown as he saw no trace of a lie or falsehood in the words or expression of the woman in front of him. My turn. Fire Sorrow said. Xietain hesitated for a moment before nodding. He might as well take the opportunity to recover a little in the process. Fire Sorrow took a deep breath, and for the first time, her calm voice changed slightly. You. Have you ever heard of a warrior capable of controlling some natural laws? Gravity, blood, that sort of thing. Xietain rolled his eyes and pointed out, there are all kinds of techniques in our Golden Domain, those able to control gravity or blood a little are not rare at all. Fire Sorrow frowned and rephrased her question a bit. This warrior uses a spear as his main weapon. Also, when he gets angry, a giant wolf totem usually appears, which increases his battle power. Totem of a giant wolf? Xietain frowned and thought about it seriously for more than 2 minutes before finally shaking his head. I know that some of you can go to our Golden Domain when you reach a certain power limit. But, all the records we have been studied, and in them, there is no one who meets the description you just gave me. Either that warrior you speak of died as soon as he landed, or he simply vanished into history without accomplishing anything great. Xietain was young compared to Fire Sorrow, and thus naturally was younger than Sirius the Heavenly Wolf. So much so that when Sirius ascended, Xietain was not even born. However, if there were no records at all, then Fire Sorrow could only fear the worst. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 1007 Fire Sorrow and Conclusion. Hearing the other party's negative feedback, Fire Sorrow's expression changed for the worse, and as she stared at Xietain, she could feel 2 wet drops sliding down her cheeks at the same time as her beautiful eyes lost some of their sparkle. Xietain narrowed his eyes as he saw this, and after a moment of silence decided to talk some more to see if he could get some information before heading home. Over the years, there have been people from this side who have gone to our side, but at least within what I know, none of them made it too far before they were killed due to different circumstances. Xietain could feel the woman in front of him getting sadder and sadder with every word that came out of his mouth, and this gave him the courage to keep talking in the hope of destabilizing her emotionally so that he would have a better chance of victory in the final clash to come. You all need to bring out the best of the best in order to stand against beings like me, but beyond the place you call Abyssal Rift, none of you would be much of anything. Xiaoli's revelation certainly came as a great shock to Crow and the others. Bullshit, if you guys have such strong warriors, then why are you sending trash instead of sending a stronger and smarter one? Hellscar snorted, not believing a single word Xiaoli was saying. In fact, even Valiant and the others didn't believe what Xiaoli was saying. It wasn't that they couldn't believe it, but that they simply didn't want to. They had practically reached the top of the universe after risking their lives for at least hundreds of thousands of years. They naturally wouldn't be willing to believe that beyond the Abyssal Rift they were no different from children. Our Golden Domain is divided into 3 great rings. Xiaoli scoffed. The outer ring is where those we consider mortals, the cultivator base, are located. The inner ring is where people like me are found, true cultivators who have broken the chains of mortality and can fly through the skies and even live millennia. You would certainly be powerful up to here, but there is still one more ring left. It is in the central ring beyond the endless sea that the strongest, the true gods live. In the central ring, you as well as I would be no different than ants. Xiaoli pointed his sword at the great sphere of darkness and said disdainfully, in the inner ring there are 5 realms of power above foundation forging that I and the wrinkled old man from before are in. Do you know what this means? It means that even the man leading you would be no more than a fart in the inner ring, compared to the really strong ones, not to mention the central ring. The more they listened, the uglier Crow and the others' expressions grew. If what Xionli was saying was true, and if the Golden Domain sent just one warrior who was one power realm higher than Xionli and the wrinkled old man, wouldn't that mean the total end of the universe the way they knew it? Xionli looked at Fire Sorrow and said disdainfully, unless the person you seek has managed to reach the central ring and become one of the strongest gods there, then he is definitely dead. However, don't get your hopes up too high. You guys are immediately wanted and hunted down once it is discovered that someone from this side crossed through the rift into the Golden Domain. For several seconds, no one said anything and Xionli narrowed his eyes trying to find the best moment to unleash his full strength and wipe out at least one of the enemies in front of him. Unfortunately, that opportunity would never come for him. You. Lucia looked at Xionli, and for the first time in a long time a glint of pity shone in her eyes as she slowly said, "You have made a grave mistake." Before Xionli could say anything, his expression changed as he sensed something was wrong. The tears that Fire Sorrow had just shed and was still shedding suddenly turned into flames, and those flames soon began to spread everywhere with such speed that even the elder that Lucifer was fighting against in the great sphere of darkness could not avoid. Domain. As they looked at the back of Fire Sorrow's silhouette standing before them and under the shocked eyes of Lilith, Crow, and Hellscar, her purple hair suddenly began to gain a strong scarlet tint and soon her figure and Xionli's disappeared into the terrifying sea of red flames. This. Crow was startled when he was engulfed by the red flames, but only calmed down and sighed in relief after he realized that he wasn't suffering any damage. You pa-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha. Crow, you're actually crying. Hellscar burst out laughing. You stupid fucking ape, you're crying too, so cut the laughter. Crow cursed loudly. What? Bullshit. Hellscar exclaimed with wide eyes. What? What's going on? Lilith was very surprised to realize that not only her teammates, but even she was shedding tears all of a sudden. Fire Sorrow has a flame that in the past was a divine flame capable of killing both gods and demons. The name of her flame is Red Soul Devouring Flame, and as a twist of fate it turns out that the special characteristic of this flame fits perfectly with Fire Sorrow's domain. Valiant calmly explained as she watched the crimson flames, covering everything with no gaps. Now that you mention it, what is the domain of Fire Sorrow? Hellscar tried to fight back the tears streaming down his face, without much success. Except for the name of her domain, no one knows for sure what it can do, because no one has survived to tell the tale, and for obvious reasons, she's not interested in telling the secrets of her trump card either. Valiant shrugged indifferently. The more negative her emotions are, the more powerful her domain is. Lucia looked over and said casually, the name of her domain is Fire Sorrow. Everyone knew that Fire Sorrow naturally wasn't the real name of the most powerful mage in the universe, but no one ever bothered or dared to ask about it. After all, higher existences were eccentric creatures after having lived so long, and most of them had suffered greatly in their paths. The only thing that mattered was knowing whether the other party was ally or enemy. Things like names or age were never really important. I see. Lilith muttered, and a sparkle of light flashed in her ruby eyes, so Fire Sorrow decided to take her name from her domain. Among the strongest generals of the demonic army, only 3 of them used their real names, Crow, Lucia, and Valiant. As for Fire Sorrow, Hellscar, and Lilith, they 3 used aliases or names of skills or things important to them. Of course, the fact that Lilith was using a fake name was unknown to practically everyone, but even if everyone knew, it wouldn't be of any importance. Approximately 20 to 30 minutes later, the red-colored flames began to slowly recede until finally the silhouette of Fire Sorrow standing in the distance with her 6 black wings spread wide appeared in everyone's view. Her hair was slowly returning to normal, and the bright red color was beginning to fade under the eyes of the 5 behind her. None of them asked what had happened to Xionli. There was no need to. Not after the 6 had received part of the records of the existence that made up the powerful invader seconds before. When Fire Sorrow turned to look at them, her sad expression from before was gone, and she had a faint gentle smile on her face. A moment later, however, Fire Sorrow's expression slowly changed to indifference, and as she looked out into the vast world of darkness in the distance muttered softly, "We can only wait now." Everyone looked towards that place where Lucifer's domain had been active for the past 48 hours, and waited with some apprehension for the ultimate conclusion. Approximately 24 hours after Xionli's fall, inside the big sphere of darkness, Xietain coughed up a mouthful of blood, and when he looked at his bloodied palm, he noticed that his blood was now black instead of red. His wrinkled face was now pale as a ghost, and his veins, now black as tree roots, stood out horribly outward. His body was riddled with wounds, and from his body, there was a strange mist of darkness continually coming out. For every second that passed, Xietain could feel himself growing weaker and weaker. I didn't expect you to actually be this strong. Xietan's voice was now not only raspy like two sandpaper rubbing together, but also sounded hoarse and heavy. Kid, you're comparing me to the younger leaders who haven't even lived half my age. You should know better than me that even among those of the same realm, there are differences in class and status, not to mention power. Lucifer wiped the trail of blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. Lucifer was not untouched, of course. The enemy he was facing this time was terribly powerful, to the point that if not for his soul armament and domain, Lucifer would probably have been in a lot and greater danger. His internal organs were slightly damaged, his golden armor was cracked, one of his wings had been blown to pieces, and from the cracks in his armor, there was golden blood constantly slipping out. Even then, this was nothing compared to Xietan's situation. Kid, you may call me that, but I suppose to someone who has lived as long as you have I'm just a kid. Although that long time would be much less if you had been born in the golden domain. Xietain nodded calmly as his aura continued to plummet. But, Lucifer, don't act so full of yourself. If you're as strong as you think you are, why don't you walk through the gate and visit my golden domain? Xietain creepily laughed while more and more blood spurted out of his mouth. You should be able to go, just like the other 7. Isn't that right? Forget it, where will I have time for my naps if I go to a place like that? Lucifer dismissed it as a joke. You won't be able to relax for long. The next invasion will be the last. It seems some people have gotten bored of playing farm, so it will soon be time to kill every plant in existence. Xietain smiled widely, showing his yellow teeth. And believe me, it will be much, much, much sooner than you can even come to imagine. Yeah, well. Lucifer held out his right hand and snapped his blood-stained fingers as he said in a low voice, but you won't be a part of it. Xietan's body began to tremble as he raised his head involuntarily. Immediately after, his body went rigid and his mouth opened wide, allowing a large amount of black smoke to pour out from his body through his eyes, nostrils, ears, and mouth. Soon, Xietan's body, which was already pure skin and bone, became even thinner, to the point of being no different from a dried mummy. Lucifer ignored the soul record's message, and as he looked at the floating corpse before him, he frowned hard, losing the calm attitude he had a moment ago. Xietan's words had alarmed him, and Lucifer began to feel a deep sense of discomfort. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 1008, World Evolution and Veil Falling, Part 1. When the sphere of darkness disappeared, the members of the demonic army immediately began to roar, loudly cheering at the sight of their leader being the final victor. Though his golden armor was riddled with cracks, though there were dried bloodstains being replaced by more blood pouring out from within his armor, the current Lucifer was a stark contrast to his ever-lazy and disinterested self. Long blonde hair down to his lower back, bright emerald green eyes, resembling the eyes of a hawk, and his back as straight as a spear. This was the leader they had decided to join. The newer members of the demonic army, who saw Lucifer making a move personally for the first time, were immediately enchanted by his presence. Lucifer looked around and a flash of surprise shone in his indifferent eyes as he saw that the battle was over. Just then, Fire Sorrow and Lucia approached. Lucifer, you won. Fire Sorrow smiled slightly. Of course. Lucifer nodded as if it was the obvious. His eyes went back and forth between both women before he said with an amused grin, Man, you look like you got your ass kicked, don't you, Lucia? Lucia. You're no funny. Lucifer shook his head as he saw his little sister's cold and indifferent expression. On the other hand, Lucifer looked at Fire Sorrow with a weird expression and said slowly, Fire Sorrow. It's not that I'm not happy about the fact that you're unharmed, but somehow I'm a little pissed off by your relaxed appearance. Did you just finish your walk in the park or something? All the members of the demonic army who had not died were wounded, some more, some less, but wounded nonetheless. However, Fire Sorrow was literally in perfect condition, as if she had never faced anyone in this war, or like an elephant stepping on a small group of ants. What can I say about it? I'm this impressive. Fire Sorrow used her left hand to flip her violet hair as she smiled arrogantly and elegantly. Haha, ugh. Lucifer was really happy to see his two closest people looking well, but when he started to laugh, he was forced to stop after being hit by a sudden wave of pain. Are you okay? Fire Sorrow asked worriedly. Lucifer waved his hand and said self-deprecatingly, it's been a long time since I've suffered any injuries. In the past, this level of pain would mean nothing to me. But now, a little damage to my inner organs is enough to make me suffer this much. That's what happens when you sleep all day, without looking to train or fight someone strong. Lucia snorted. Your pain tolerance is low. Definitely lower than a lower existence used to fighting to the death. Lower existences, huh? Lucifer smiled with nostalgia, and as he looked at his army proudly cheering he couldn't help but feel a tinge of sadness. I miss those days. When we were lower existences we never celebrated our victories right away out of respect for our fallen comrades, but higher existences are proud by nature. Lucifer had worked hard to try to make his demonic army more like a family than a mere rallying point for powerhouses who wanted to break the limitation of time, and from a certain point of view he had succeeded in doing so considering that his faction shared relatively close ties compared to most other factions. However, Lucifer was still unable to reach the extent he wished. I wonder if our wolf could have done it. No, he probably could. Lucifer smiled somewhat bitterly and shook his head as he wondered where he had gone wrong or what he had overlooked. Is there a need to compare yourself to others? Lucia pointed out casually, that person is that person and you are you. You just have to do what you can do and improve. We are soul evolvers, are you forgetting that? We are the ones who are limiting ourselves. Lucifer looked at his younger sister and said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry, sometimes I really wish I had as positive a mindset as you do. Is there anything that worries you in this life? Not having enemies to kill. Lucia replied with the same tone of voice and expression as before. Ha 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 ha, ugh. As Lucifer frowned in pain, Fire Sorrow approached him and whispered her little exchange of words with Xietain before she killed him. Li Zishi? Lucifer frowned and said dumbfounded, who the fuck is that? Fire Sorrow shook her head in response as a sad expression crossed her face. Seeing this, Lucifer pushed to the back of his head the unknown name to think about it later and an increasingly hesitant expression appeared on his face. He had noticed that Fire Sorrow's sadness had begun to grow from the moment she started talking about the Golden Domain and the fact that Xietain did not know any warriors with the characteristics that represented the Heavenly Wolf. Seeing Lucifer's hesitant expression and Fire Sorrow's sentimental loss, Lucia snorted and turned away from both of them without any desire to want her mentality to be affected by emotions or doubts. While the mages of the demonic army did their work using healing-type skills to help those in the worst condition, Fire Sorrow and Lucifer remained silent for a minute or two before she finally realized that something wasn't right. Fire Sorrow's expression grew more and more serious, even getting a hint of coldness as she stared him in the face. Lucifer and Fire Sorrow were friends who had known each other all their lives. They knew each other better than their parents had gotten to know them when they were still alive. Millions of years of friendship, and although they sometimes went whole years without seeing each other even once, it was not that long compared to the time they had spent together, fighting side by side, and coming up with ideas to evolve and gain power. It was impossible for Fire Sorrow not to realize that Lucifer was hiding something important from her, given her understanding of him. As to what he was hiding? Fire Sorrow wasn't stupid, quite the contrary. Seeing Fire Sorrow's expression becoming colder and colder to the point of being bone-chilling and emotionless, Lucifer finally sighed and shook his head. Forget it, I was planning on telling you after the war against the Golden Domain anyway. Fire Sorrow just stared at him with a cold expression on her face, but they both knew how agitated her heart was jumping in her chest as she waited for him to continue. Lucifer explained how he made his way to the Milky Way, and told her about him waiting for many hours in outer space surrounded by nothing but stars in the location where previously there had been a small but beautiful sky-blue planet. The more Fire Sorrow heard, the louder her heart beat. Gradually, her firm and indifferent expression began to waver. The reaction of the bloody succubus was strange after Meads launched a joke-like attack, but at the time I didn't think much of it. It wasn't until later that I remembered that if that planet was there it would definitely have been hit by that old fart's beam of light. Lucifer continued, back then, the bloody succubus seemed frightened and subsequently furious with Meads. The level of hatred and anger from her at that moment were too high to have originated from just a joke attack. So I thought that the reason the bloody succubus had become that sentimental resembled someone who had just had something precious taken away from them. At this point, Lucifer finally saw Fire Sorrow's pupils shrink fiercely and finally understood that she had already been able to draw her own conclusions. There's definitely something fishy going on, but it might not be what you think. Lucifer dumped a bucket of cold water over her head and said casually, I did my best to look, but I found nothing there, not even the slightest spatial disturbance or defensive barrier. So I could be wrong, and maybe it's not what you're thinking. Unfortunately or not, Fire Sorrow was no longer listening to what he was saying. She waved her magic staff to her left, and along with a sound similar to that caused by a glass cup falling to the ground and shattering into dozens of pieces, a spatial crack appeared. Well, wait a minute. Lucifer opened his eyes wide in shock as he saw Fire Sorrow step forward and walk into the rift. You still have to help me heal, dash. Lucifer paused as he stood dumbfounded watching the space rift closing in front of his eyes with his left hand stupidly stretched forward without grabbing anything. The others. He sighed and finally retracted his hand helplessly. A few seconds later, Lucifer felt a small number of familiar auras approaching, and as he looked ahead he saw Valiant, Lilith, Crow, and Hellscar flapping their wings towards where he was. Your Majesty, did something important happen? Valiant asked as she looked over to where Fire Sorrow had just disappeared. Lucifer sighed wearily and waved his hand several times. It's nothing important. Fire Sorrow will probably be gone for a couple of days and then come back disappointed. Disappointed? Hellscar looked even more confused. Your Majesty, is it good that Fire Sorrow is gone? Crow frowned. He looked beyond the large wall and said with some hesitation, although it's not highly probable, we can't rule out the fact that someone might try to take advantage now that we're all in a state of extreme weakness. Humph. They dare to? Lucifer snorted and a glint of coldness shone in his eyes. This daddy's been sleeping too long anyway. Might as well teach newborns to respect adults if they don't know how to behave. The corner of Crow's mouth twitched several times, but in the end, he said nothing and simply nodded silently. Just at that moment, all the blood, flesh, and bodies of the invaders floating on the battlefield suddenly began to release a white glow that became brighter and brighter with each passing second. Lilith, who had been looking at the place where Fire Sorrow had opened a spatial rift, immediately shifted her focus to what was happening and her expression turned grim. Don't worry, bloody succubus Lilith. Valiant explained upon seeing her expression, it's nothing bad. This always happens after every war against the beings living on the other side of the abyssal rift. Under the surprised eyes of Lilith and those experiencing this phenomenon for the first time, all the records that made up the invaders' bodies were decompressed into particles of light. Half of these light particles hit the abyssal rift, reducing its size in real time until in less than 5 minutes it became a virtually unnoticeable glowing red, in the middle of the vast outer space. As for the other half, Lilith watched in awe as flashes of white light flew everywhere, piercing through the chaos wall and disappearing beyond as if they had a clear destination, off to somewhere unknown. Heh. Lucifer sneered. Those idiots are using us as a farm, but little do they know that we also see them as our personal farm. Your Majesty? This time even Valiant was confused by Lucifer's words. However, he simply shook his head and said nothing more. Everyone, let's go back to Crown World. We'll recover first, then you can leave and continue doing whatever you were doing before. Lucifer flew towards his castle and was soon followed by the other members of the demonic army. Lilith frowned at the place where Fire Sorrow had disappeared, but after several seconds she simply shook her head and headed for the castle as well. Her wound needed to heal, and she needed to replenish her mana and stamina before returning to Earth. If that little man sees me in this condition, I fear he will go mad. Lilith smiled lovingly at the thought of a certain lower existence. As for that said certain lower existence. What the fuck is this? Xietain was dumbfounded as he stared at the ice mirror in front of him. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 1009 World Evolution and Veil Falling, Part 2. After his heart-to-heart talk with Xietain, Xietain did not make any sudden moves at all and simply tried to relax and rest to recover from his injuries as fast as possible. Like Shangguan Bingshui and Evangeline, Xietain was out of danger but still had an arm and a leg to recover. In exactly 45 days after Xietain opened his eyes after sleeping for 15 days straight in the Collector's Pocket world, Shangguan Bingshui made a 100% recovery, and the pulverized bones in her arms were once again harder than steel. Evangeline had recovered 100% 15 days before Shangguan Bingshui, and leaving aside Kong Jun, who still needed considerable time to recover, the biggest problem was still Bai Zemin. Having spent a total of 2 months in the collector's pocket world but only 12 days in the outside world, the healing speed of the group would be seen as insane from the point of view of those unaware of the power that the collector's pocket watch had. Unfortunately, even 2 months was not enough for Bai Zemin to recover his lost limbs 100%. Bai Zemin looked at his left arm, which was 1/4 to fully regenerated, and then looked at his left leg, which still needed to grow from the calf down. Arg. Fuck its mother. This daddy can't stand still anymore. You stand still. Bingshui, I'm telling you to let go of me. Bingshui, let mommy help you hold him back. You mom, what are you doing? Shangguan Xinyue, where do you think you're touching? Evangeline and Wu Yijuan had rather interesting expressions on their faces as they watched the scene in front of them, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. In the end, Bai Zemin managed to convince Shangguan Bingshui that even though he had not fully recovered, it was not a good idea to stay MIA for too long. To begin with, 3 of the most important figures for the smooth running of the Transcendent faction and its development had been missing for almost 2 weeks. This was naturally not good, especially not now that China had just fully united and needed stability. Furthermore, neither Bai Zemin nor any of those inside the collector's pocket world had a clear idea of what was happening on the mainland at the moment. In fact, they didn't even have a clear idea of how things were on the earth in general now, and Bai Zemin was worried about what the former Queen Shirlin had seen when she used her clairvoyance skill. It's been 12 days since Meng Qi is in the Sea City. Bai Zemin remarked in a deep voice with a hint of worry, although I don't think anything bad will happen to her since Xian Meier is with her. None of us can completely rule out the possibility that the East Sea King is a complete idiot and doesn't understand the repercussions of harming her. Bai Zemin didn't care whether he had the power to take revenge or not. What he cared about was the safety and well-being of his little sister. It was no use having the power and ability to annihilate the entire East Sea if Meng Qi was no longer alive. Revenge was only a way to temporarily vent anger and sadness, but eventually all that would remain was sadness and anger, not only towards one's enemies, but towards one's own powerlessness. Hearing all the valid points given by Bai Zemin, even Shangguan Bingshui could no longer hold him back, despite the fact that she, as well as everyone else, preferred him to make a full recovery before leaving this place. But Wu Yijuan looked at Bai Zemin's current condition and said worriedly, "How are you supposed to move with your left leg like this?" Bai Zemin frowned, but quickly eased up. "Actually, I've been thinking about this before, but I think I can move using my blood manipulation skill. Just give me a few hours to practice, and then we can get out of here." Bai Zemin headed to his room after leaving everyone behind, but before he began to put his theory into practice, what he did was to take out the scrolls containing the skills Shadow Control, Dark Mist, and Drain Life. /N, ch 926, 866, and 823, respectively. After learning the 3 skills, Bai Zemin immediately felt more powerful, even though none of the skills he had just learned were actually increasing his strength unless he activated them. The best thing about this is that I still have 16 free slots to learn active skills. Bai Zemin sighed as he recalled his times of abstinence while stuck at level 50. Once I get out of here and make sure Meng Qi is okay, the first thing I will do is look for enemies to defeat. Now that I can use Drain Life and use the health stat of my enemies to my advantage, the power of restoration will be far stronger. All this added together with overlap regeneration, and Bai Zemin had turned into a truly terrifying existence. At this moment, he was simply perfect no matter which way one looked at him. Terrifying physical attack power. Extremely high magical attack power. Physical defense high enough that no pre-apocalypse weapon below annihilation level could harm him. Magical defense frightening enough to be able to fight powerful 4th order mages, despite being in the 2nd order. Stamina high enough to fight for days without any problem. Ability to regenerate his stamina and mana dozens of times. Mass and field control skills. Vital recovery and body regeneration skills. The more he thought about it, the more surprised Bai Zemin became at how well his skills were synchronized. After learning the 3 skills he had reserved for himself, Bai Zemin used blood manipulation to create something similar to a prosthesis, and carefully attached that prosthesis to the part of his leg that had yet to regenerate. Using small blood thread-like connectors, Xietain carefully attached them to the flesh and then to the nerves of his leg, and although he felt a bit of pain in the process, it wasn't too bad. It took Xietain about 1.5 hours to be able to move with about 60% of his total freedom, but that was the absolute limit, and he soon realized that if he tried to overcome it, the blood prosthesis would be destroyed unless he was willing to spend hundreds of mana points per second to sustain it. In the end, Xietain decided to accept that 60% at the cost of consuming only 5 mana point every 10 minutes to keep the prosthesis hard and firm. After that, Xietain did the same, but this time he created a prosthesis for his left arm using blood manipulation. Being able to move his fake arm with 50% freedom was not that difficult when it came to walking, jumping, and running short distances. However, the freedom Xietain had was less. If he used too much strength or too much agility for a sudden movement, what would happen was that the prosthesis would burst into pieces, damaging Xietan's nerves in the process. In the end, Xietan's mana consumption amounted to 1 mana point per minute to keep both prostheses at the same time at all moments. Considering that he now had over 6,700 mana points in total even without taking into account overlap regeneration, such consumption was negligible in his eyes. When Shangguan Bingshui, Wu Yijun, Evangeline, and Shangguan Xingyue saw Xietain casually walking out of the house wearing a reddish-colored leather armor, the three women were a bit speechless. This is basically cheating. Shangguan Bingshui forced a smile and shook her head. On the other hand, Wu Yijun didn't seem worried about amazing sights, but rather was worried about another more important matter. Won't walking like this hinder your recovery? Wu Yijun asked as she looked into his eyes worriedly. Wu Yijun had been using Revitalize on Xietain at least one time a day for the past 2 months in the collector's pocket watch. This made the effect of restoration double during the initial minutes, and thus she had a clearer idea of his current situation. Indeed. Xietain sighed and said with some regret, I'm practically not regenerating at all as these 2 prosthetics hinder the growth of more flesh and the evolution of tissues. Isn't that bad? Evangeline frowned. It's fine, I just need to keep myself like this in front of the king and such so they don't try to cause trouble unnecessarily. I'll use all my free time to help my limbs regrow. Xietain dismissed this easily. When you say the word help, I somehow don't think you mean rest. Shangguan Bingshui glared at him. Little Bingshui, I see you know me quite well. Xietain grimaced before nodding, you're right, it's not about rest. But, you'll see what I mean later. I just learned a couple of good skills, and one of them deals precisely with increasing my recovery rate when I'm facing an enemy. Who are you calling little Bingshui? Forget it if you've already made up your mind, you stubborn man. The person in question rolled her eyes before letting go of a small sigh that perhaps only she understood. Shangguan Bingshui looked at Xietain weirdly and said slowly, by the way, have you looked at yourself in a mirror during these past 60 days? Looked in a mirror? Xietain shook his head, no, there are no mirrors in this place, and I don't need one. He paused as he realized something and asked with a frown. Why do you ask? Shangguan Bingshui did not respond immediately, but first exchanged glances with her mother and the other 2 women before looking at Xietain with a somewhat funny expression on her face. I think it will be better if you look at it with your own eyes, instead of hearing it from someone else. At the same time, and as she said these words, Shangguan Bingshui extended her right hand in front of her upwards, and a small but powerful amount of fog began to swirl in her palm. Soon, a surprisingly elegant silver-colored small hand mirror floated above Shangguan Bingshui's palm. She used Ice Maker, and soon the small ice mirror floated toward Xietain. Xietain took the mirror with his right hand and looked at Shangguan Bingshui before looking at Wu Yijun and then moving on to Shangguan Xingyue and Evangeline. Just look in the mirror. You won't figure out anything by looking in our faces. Wu Yijun let out an amused chuckle. Xietain nodded slowly before looking at his reflection with some apprehension in his heart. He didn't have to look too hard, the change was evident at a glance. Xietain watched wide-eyed as his hair swayed gently in the warm breeze, blowing from a distance. The hair of Bai Dilan, Xietan's father, was black and the hair color of Yi Linger, who was Xietan's mother, was also jet black. Most Chinese had black hair after all. Brown hair was a bit rare, while Shangguan Bingshui's white hair color was simply a rarity among thousands of rarities. Xietan's hair had been black all his life, jet black, deep black like the dark night sky devoid of moonlight or stars. But When Zemin saw the several strands of bright crimson red intermingling with his black hair, what he felt was as if someone had given him a heavy blow on the back of the head and almost fell to the ground. What the fuck is this? Zemin was dumbfounded as he stared at the ice mirror in front of him. Zemin's reaction was completely expected, but to the three women who had been seeing him for 2 months, it was no longer anything unusual. Don't worry, you look way sexier now. Wu Yijun blushed slightly. It's not about sexy or not sexy. Zemin admitted in his heart that he did indeed look hot, but that wasn't the problem. My mother will definitely rip my head off if she sees this. Zemin could still remember how his mother always complained about hooligans who dyed their hair different colors. Ha ha ha. Shangguan Xingyue laughed good-naturedly and in between tears and laughter said in a cheerful voice, "King or not, it seems that we mothers are the real rulers after all." Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 10 World Evolution and Veil Falling, last. Be that as it may, as Zemin looked at himself in the mirror, he finally remembered that when he became blood mystic upon reaching the second order and along with the evolution process of his race, there wasn't just a massive increase in overall power. I understand the part about increasing my charm and all that, but... Zemin sighed as he handed the mirror back to Shangguan Bingshui. Was it really necessary to change my hair color like this? It's okay, little king. Shangguan Xingyue, who had finally stopped laughing, comforted him. Yijun wasn't lying just now. You really look hotter and more mature this way. Even if you say it like that, I can't help but feel that I look like a teenager in his rebellious stage. Zemin winced. You'll get used to it soon, and when that happens, you won't feel anything strange. Shangguan Bingshui pointed out calmly. Once you get used to the change, you'll realize that you actually look better than you think and you won't pay any attention to it anymore. A matter of getting used to the changes, I guess. Like everything else in this life. Zemin sighed before finally nodding. Forget it. Nothing to do about it anyway. We'll see how things turn out. About an hour later. Are you all ready? Zemin looked at the 4 women in front of him and said in a serious voice, remember, we're not looking for trouble, we'll just go look for Meng Qi while showing our support towards Xian Meier. That's all. Shangguan Bingshui was wearing a new armor that Zemin had given her, and although it was not as good as her previous one, it was still good enough to help her out of a tight spot. I understand. Even though we have control of China, controlling the seas surrounding China is a completely different matter. Fighting in the water is really troublesome. My agility drops drastically in the ocean, I can't move freely, and I need to consume too much stamina and mana so that the water waves don't reveal my position. Evangeline, who was wearing tight leather armor, pointed out with a sigh. If possible, I don't want to have to fight in the water ever again in my life. Shangguan Xingyue was wearing a seemingly normal white-colored dress, but it was actually a rank 2 magic robe. I felt completely useless in the battle against the alligator from before. The feelings you 3 have are my feelings. Zemin nodded with a serious expression on his face. Fighting on dry land or even in the air were 2 absolutely and completely different things from fighting underwater. Even Zemin felt a tremendous drop in his power under the sea. Well, I felt pretty good fighting underwater. Wu Yijun smiled shyly. My hydrokinesis skill is much stronger here. In fact, Wu Yijun and Shangguan Bingshui were the only ones who, despite losing something, had also gained something in return while fighting under the sea. After the group of 4 emerged from the collector's pocket world, what greeted them was pure darkness. The 4 felt a great force pressing down on their bodies not only from above but also from the sides and from below. It was as if 4 giant steamrollers were advancing towards a central point, which was where they were, gradually squashing them. Are we in the same place as before? Wu Yijun asked, with a frown. Shangguan Bingshui felt the cold temperature of the surroundings and said in a clear but cold voice, we are definitely under the sea. But what is wrong with this gravity? Zemin frowned as he felt a very bad premonition in his chest, and as if life itself was waiting for him and his team to come out of the collector's pocket world, a message flashed in the eyes of all living beings on planet Earth. Earth officially enters the 3rd stage of evolution. Zemin and his group did not know it as they were too deep below sea level, but if they were on the surface, they would undoubtedly be greatly shocked. From different parts of the world, even from a marine area somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, 5 bright and thick beams of light rose up like columns and burst into the sky. The 5 columns of light were so bright and their aura so powerful that from anywhere in the world one would definitely be able to see them break through the clouds and illuminate the sky for several seconds. At the same time, millions of survivors all over the world ranging from humans to animals and plants found themselves being crushed by the sudden increased gravitational pressure of the world. Strong earthquakes shook the planet Earth and ferocious waves hundreds of meters high rose like giants, before hitting the coast and wreaking catastrophic havoc. Millions died exploding into a pile of bloody pulp with broken bones unable to withstand the gravitational pressure, but the number of deaths caused by apocalyptic disasters definitely amounted to at least a few 100,000 all over the Earth. The world expanded, its laws strengthened, and the countless mana tornadoes spinning out of control everywhere looked threatening even to the strongest. The density and purity of the mana that surrounded the world did not stop growing, and those soul evolvers with less capacity to adapt fell on their knees and little by little began to mutate into zombies. The commander's ring in Xietain's hands was glowing brightly and all the golden communication runes were beating violently. Shangguan Bingshui, Shangguan Xinyue, Wu Yijuan, and Evangeline were stunned as they listened to the frenetic voices coming out from the ring. From different bases, reports of everything that was happening were coming in real time one after another. How can this be possible? Wu Yijuan murmured in shock. Fuck. Xietain thundered in frustration and anger, causing the already agitated waters to shudder and explode outward at his outburst. Some bases had already fallen and the losses his faction had suffered in a matter of minutes were already incalculable. And they had yet to even take into account the impending future attack from other races. Why are their soul evolvers turning into zombies? Shangguan Bingshui exclaimed with a fluttering heart. Weren't we supposed to be fine after the first wave? The first wave of mana had turned at least 70% or 80% of humanity into zombies, mindless creatures. This second wave certainly wouldn't be as terrifying, but that didn't mean it would be any less frightening considering there would be soul evolvers falling this time. You 4 don't resist and quickly return to the collector's pocket world. Xietain ordered in a deep voice and without waiting for a response sent his will towards the 4 females beside him. Evangeline and Shangguan Xinyue disappeared in an instant without asking questions, but Shangguan Bingshui and Wu Yijuan seemed to have thought the same thing as they both asked at exactly the same time, "What about you?" The 2 friends looked at each other, and although they could not see each other's faces as they were both wearing masks they could sense each other's surprise. "I'll go find Meng-Chi first, then I'll teleport to where our families are." Xietain replied firmly. "There is no time to waste." Shangguan Bingshui and Wu Yijuan nodded and no longer insisted, and the next second they both disappeared without even leaving a trace of their auras behind. "Damn bastard." Xietain shouted through his teeth and with a mighty stomp he launched himself towards the bottom of the sea, completely ignoring and shattering all pressure and resistance the sea put in front of him. Along the way, many frenzied sea creatures rushed towards Xietain while others fought each other. Giant snakes over 300 meters long and with bodies as wide as buildings, giant squids over 1,000 meters, whale-like mutant sharks, and many other mutant sea beasts unleashed a bloody hell under the sea. "Scram to hell!" Xietain roared and without stopping he continued to move forward at full speed. Regardless of their size or level, all the sea creatures that crossed his path either froze and exploded or their bodies were pierced from side to side as they were ripped through by Xietain who moved several times faster than a bullet. With the earth expanding in real time, the East Sea naturally became larger and deeper. Therefore, the small white dot that was once in sight was nowhere to be seen. Just at that moment, a message that only Xietain received flashed across his retinas. After the fall of one of the strongest beings of the past, the buried history phase has been opened. Buried history? What the hell is that? Xietain no longer knew what was going on, but he certainly did not stop to think, and unfortunately, there was no one to answer his doubts. However, deep in his soul, the same sleeping object that had released a streak of crimson lightning just at the moment when the attack of the Bible God should have destroyed the planet lit up for a brief moment before it practically faded out completely. Approximately 10 minutes later, and with the support of crimson lightning flash, as well as overlap regeneration, Xietain finally spotted the white dot from before. There it is. He sped up even more, but was soon surprised to see bright flashes of light breaking in all directions from the white spot that was where the capital of the kingdom Xian Mayer was part of. Boom. 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 Explosion after explosion caused the East Sea to shake, and soon, Xietain could feel the unmistakable feeling of blood enveloping his existence completely. The water around him had become so viscous that even without being able to see further than 5 meters ahead, Xietain understood what was happening. It seems that the sea creatures are also experiencing their own battle. The mere thought made Xietain uneasy, and with a dragon roar, caused all the sea creatures before him to explode all at once as he headed towards where Meng-Chi was. Even without being blood siblings, Xietain could feel her approximate location. It was impossible for him to miss that feeling of familiarity belonging to someone he had spent most of his life with. If it was his past self, performing this feat would have been impossible, considering that Xietain had even crushed more than 5 second-order beings without even looking at them while turning tens of thousands per second into warm, liquid blood. But, his current self was a completely different being, and the power of his new class was being displayed even though he wasn't even trying. Outer space. Fire Sorrow had taken about a day to reach the place where her home had once been. She had spent 70% of her total mana, practically triple what she had consumed during the war against the invaders of the Golden Domain. This was because Fire Sorrow tried to cut off as much space as possible and jump extremely long distances in order to reach her target even a second earlier. Unfortunately, when she got there, all she saw was a huge empty space of nothingness. But Fire Sorrow wasn't too discouraged. Lucifer said he saw Lilith coming out of this place. A door, a crack, something, there has to be something. She seemed to be ignoring on a subconscious level the words in which Lucifer harshly pointed out to her that even after searching for a long time and studying the area, he couldn't find the slightest spatial disturbance or defensive barrier. Fire Sorrow searched with her eyes, cast detection magic, summoned some special beasts created from magic specialized in sensing magical power, and even used high-tech devices to detect anomalies in space. Unfortunately, even after about 5 hours, she had found nothing. 5 hours of time was nothing to an eternal being. 5 hours was certainly nothing for someone who had lived millions of years. To Fire Sorrow, 5 hours was no different than the blink of an eye. But, for the first time in a long time, 5 hours meant a lot to her. Although only 5 hours had passed, Fire Sorrow began to despair at finding nothing. The disappointment of feeling hope after so long only to find that it was all in her head proved to be much stronger than she expected. Fire Sorrow looked up at the bright hot sun and with a bitter smile on her face pulled out the little old and nothing special looking pendant that when the ghost of the heavenly wolf attacked could have been salvation, but that she refused to sacrifice even if it cost her life. This pendant had not much meaning. To others it would be no different than a piece of junk. But to her, it was something very important, her most prized possession, even more than her most powerful treasures. "What am I supposed to do?" she said with hidden bitterness. Just then, Fire Sorrow felt as if something was being torn apart behind her. As she looked straight ahead, her eyes widened slightly and her heart began to race. Fire Sorrow watched as her surroundings lit up crimson red and heard what seemed to be countless flashes of lightning crackling for a few seconds before everything returned to normal. Except for one thing. Fire Sorrow's surroundings had now taken on a faint sky-blue radiance, warm and not at all blinding but pleasant to look at. Like someone scared of running into an illusion and getting even more disappointment, Fire Sorrow did not turn completely around but like a malfunctioning machine slowly turned her head to look over her shoulder. Once the right side of her pretty face lit up before the faint blue radiance, Fire Sorrow's world fell silent as she watched with tears in her eyes and her heart beating faster and faster as the beautiful big blue planet grew bigger and bigger in real time before her eyes.